was 7 years old when my family went on holiday to Gran Canaria. During this holiday, we visited a rather large water park just outside of the Puerto Rico. Not referring to the Caribbean island, it's the name of a holiday resort situated on the southwest coast of the Gran Canaria island. The water park was massive, 4 sections with about 5 slides per area, so everyone seemed to be having fun. But I was very young at the time and mainly kept to the smaller kid slides and the shallow wave pools, sometimes venturing to the medium slides with my father. But after a while, my parents wanted to go on the biggest slides the park had to offer, and they left me and my younger brother in the care of my uncle, who was with my cousin in the kids' pool. I tell him that I'm going to the medium slides again, which were within viewing distance from where he was. He allowed it, and off I went. After a while, I headed back to the kids' pool, to where our loungers were, to check up with my uncle and to see if my parents had returned yet. But when I got back, I couldn't find anyone. Me being only 7 at the time, I began to panic a little bit, while going off in the direction of the big slides to find my parents. After a while of walking about, probably looking very distressed, a chubby Englishman comes up to me. I'm Scottish, so I can tell, and he asked me if I was alright. He seemed nice at first, and offered to help me look for my parents. But I knew all about stranger danger, and I wasn't allowed to talk to him, so I just walked off, still looking for my parents. A few minutes later, I see the man again. In hindsight, he was probably following me. He approaches me again and offers to get me some popcorn and a drink while I waited for my parents, to which again I say no, as my mother told me to never accept anything from strangers under any circumstances. At this point, I see a lifeguard, and I walk over to him for help. After speaking with him and telling him that I had to find my parents, the man appears again and begins telling the lifeguard that he was a family friend and that he would take me back to where we were. The lifeguard could tell by the look on my face that this man was lying, and then asks, "Do you know this guy?" To which I tell him no. The lifeguard then offers to walk me back to where I had last seen my family, which I obviously take him up on, as by now, I'm a bit creeped out. We eventually find my parents by the sunbeds. I could tell that my mother was very upset. The lifeguard explained to my parents what happened, and that he'll keep a lookout for that guy, so he doesn't bother me again. I don't remember much after this. Years later, when I was old enough to understand, my mom told me why she was so upset when they didn't know where I was, other than the obvious concern that her son was gone. Earlier that year in Portugal, there was a disappearance of a girl that really hit the UK hard. I'm sure most of you know what I'm referring to. Many people were afraid of going abroad on holiday. Looking back, I sometimes think about how I could have been the second kid to go missing that year. When 2 of my friends and I were juniors in college back in 2018, we decided to sneak into a place called Playland Park in Rye, New York. One of my friends grew up in Rye and had done this many times before, so while I was a bit nervous about getting arrested for trespassing, I felt a bit reassured that the park wasn't very well monitored at night. It was around 1 a.m. when we drove and parked our car next to a large fence and attempted to scale it. It was rather difficult and required us to step onto each other's hands to get over, which gave me intense anxiety about how the 3 of us were going to get back over the fence on the way out. After both of my friends got over the fence, I attempted to chicken out and just wait in the car. But after a bit of peer pressure, I caved in, and after several minutes of struggling, I managed to make it over the fence on my own, and we began walking while lighting up a joint. It was pitch black at this point, and almost all the lights in the park were off. We approached the water flume ride, which went up about 100 to 150 feet and then dropped into a steep slope. Along the side of the ride was a staircase for technicians and employees, which my friends decided to climb for a better view. At this point, I chickened out and decided to stay at the bottom out of a fear of heights. As they climbed the stairs, I looked out across the park and noticed something very strange. We weren't alone. Several hundred feet from us was a pond with what appeared to be a small boat or raft inside, and about 4 or so people riding it with flashlights attached to their heads. What was even stranger was the fact that there were 2 dark figures swimming in the pond, looking for something beneath the water. I could barely make out the silhouettes of these figures, but after a few minutes I noticed that they could see us and began mobilizing the boat in our direction. I frantically started to scream to my friends, who were now all the way at the top of the water ride and could barely hear me. At this point, the boat had reached land, and the small lights on their helmets were now heading in our direction, fast. My friends finally raced down the stairs, and we began sprinting as fast as we could down the boardwalk that was dimly lit, then back toward the way we came. As we sprinted down the long, straight boardwalk, I realized that we were completely visible now, and began to accept the reality that we might be caught and arrested. We rounded the corner, got back to the fence, and climbed over safely, hopping into our car and dipping out immediately. I couldn't believe that we weren't caught, as the figures who were chasing after us were no more than a few hundred feet away when they initially spotted us. To this day, I still wonder why the hell there were people swimming around in a pond at an amusement park at 1:30 in the morning. My friend told me that kids had drowned in that pond before, making me wonder if they were searching for a body. I googled any articles I could find, but to no avail. My friends and I are still totally puzzled by this experience and can't really come to a logical explanation. Just thinking about it now still gives me the chills. This happened in the summer of 2008, toward the end of my 8th grade year. My parents started me in school a bit early, so by this time I was 13 years old. As a side note, I wouldn't hit puberty until I was well into high school, so I was one of the smallest out of my classmates. The point is, there was no way anyone could have mistaken me for an adult. The 8th grade trip this year was to visit the nearest amusement park, Six Flags Great America. For the first part of the visit, I was in a group of about 6 students. Several rides later, my group wanted to stop to go get something to eat and just relax and chill out for a while. But since this was the first year that I came here where I was actually tall enough to ride the roller coasters, that was the only thing that I was interested in doing. So myself and my friend Kevin branched off from the group so we could just ride the roller coasters for the rest of the visit. We got in a few rides before getting in line for the Raging Bull for a second time. By this time, it was getting late, and the lines were long, but there was still enough time for a couple more rides. Unfortunately, I hadn't considered how big of an issue my motion sickness was going to be. Whenever I got off a roller coaster, I would have this feeling of vertigo that only got worse with each ride I would take. At first, it would begin to go away after a few minutes, and would be completely gone by the time I was boarding the next coaster. But each time it would take longer and longer to go away. So we were in line for the Raging Bull again, and I was already starting to feel nauseous even before getting on. I still didn't want to chicken out, so I got on anyway, hoping that any of my nausea would go away as it had earlier. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The moment I stepped off, my world was spinning, and I had the worst nausea-induced headache combination I've ever felt in my life. In contrast, Kevin said that he would get back in line and ride the Raging Bull one last time before Six Flags closed. At that time, there was only 15 minutes before closing. This time, however, I told Kevin that there was no way I was riding again. I told him that he could go on, and that I would be waiting for him outside the ride. He said he didn't want to ride alone, but saw that I wasn't going to change my mind. So he got in line while I waited at the bench right outside the entrance. In retrospect, I should have tried waiting in line with him instead of splitting up, but I truly felt that I couldn't stand without falling over. So I sat on the bench, and he would be taking his last ride without me. 10 minutes passed while I was sitting on this bench, trying to recuperate. My eyes were closed and I was trying to relax, so I could only hear the people and music around me. It was then that I realized someone was saying,
"Hello?"
over and over again. Once I became aware of it, I realized that I had been hearing it for a while, and had just been tuning it out with every other noise I was hearing. My next thought was, I wish whoever that person is calling would answer already. Until I realized that there wasn't anyone around except for myself and the person calling. Finally, it occurred to me that the person was calling to me. I turned and saw a woman who I had never seen before standing in the Raging Bull line. She looked like a perfectly normal woman in her 30s and had a friendly smile on her face. Back then, I was always very polite and even a people pleaser to a certain extent. Despite how horrible I was feeling, the first thing I did was apologize for not answering sooner, telling her that I didn't know that she was calling out to me.
"Don't worry about it, sweetheart. What's your name?"
I told her my first name without giving it much thought. She then said,
"Wow, that's a lovely name."
Which I thought was odd, because I have a very ordinary and boring name. She did not tell me hers, though I wouldn't get a chance to ask, because right away she asked me if I wanted to ride on the Raging Bull with her. I simply and politely told her that I didn't, and hoped that she would leave it at that, as I was still feeling miserable.
"You should come with me."
I can't. I'm not feeling well. That's why I'm here waiting for my friend.
"Oh, come on, you'll be fine."
She insisted. Sorry, I really shouldn't. I'll probably puke on the ride. She basically ignored what I said, all the while still smiling.
"Oh, don't worry about it. Just come on already."
At this point, her tone was still playful. Sorry, I'm waiting for my friend. He'll be back soon. If I get on, he won't know where I am.
"He can wait for you here. Don't worry, it's no big deal. It'll make you feel better."
I told her that Kevin wouldn't stick around here, because he might have assumed that I had gone back to the bus or to the bathroom. Not even paying attention to my concerns, she just said again,
"I said it will be fine. Now come on."
Finally, I was beginning to think that this was weird. Why was this random woman so adamant about me going on this ride with her? I couldn't understand it. Since nothing I said had persuaded her to leave me alone, I just reminded her that Six Flags was closing anyway, so there was no point. By now, there must have been less than 5 minutes until closing time. I knew that by the time we got to the ride, they wouldn't be letting anyone on. That's when she said,
"I work here, so it's fine."
I didn't see what that had to do with anything. Could employees ride after closing? I don't know. But I did notice that she wasn't wearing any kind of uniform to identify her as an employee. She was just wearing regular street clothes. She must have noticed how I was looking at her, because she quickly changed her story.
"Okay, I don't work here, but I do have a lot of friends that work here."
Again, I didn't see what this had to do with anything. Would her and I be able to ride after closing just because she had some friends who worked there? And why did she even mention that she worked there when she really didn't? Something fishy was going on here. I then asked, "Why don't you just ride with your friends?" because I was still very confused as to why she was asking me when she apparently had a lot of friends around who would be off of work soon. Her smile widened.
Well, you're special, and I want to go with you.
That just made me feel more confused and uncomfortable. I kept trying to explain why I didn't want to get on, repeating my reasons again, trying to be as polite as possible, because I didn't like rejecting people or hurting their feelings. I was still hoping that she would just take no for an answer and leave me alone. She continued to ignore my protests and just kept asking me to go with her, saying that it was no big deal and that she didn't want to go with anyone but me. After a while, she finally said,
Is that your friend?
It was to my relief that I saw Kevin coming out of the exit. I headed toward him quickly, but then stopped and turned to wave goodbye to the woman. It still seemed rude to me just to walk away from someone who had been talking to me for several minutes, even if she was being annoying. When I turned to her and saw her face, it was the first time that I genuinely felt afraid during this encounter. This entire time she had been smiling, acting very nice and friendly, but now she was staring at me completely infuriated, almost enraged. I was the kind of kid who never liked upsetting people or getting into trouble, so I had never seen anyone look at me like that before. It was a look of pure hatred on her face that made me feel like if I had been any closer to her, she might have attacked me. I was so anxious about it that I went over to Kevin before he reached me and left with him quickly, because I was worried that she would leave the line and chase after us. Thank God she didn't. But also, I feel like she was a bit too smart to attack me in public. The thing is, the line leading up to the Raging Bull was very long, and most of it was hidden from outside view. Since it was approaching closing time, the line would have been mostly deserted, so if I had gone with her, it would have been just me and her, completely isolated. The only people I told were my parents. Once I explained the situation, my mom said that if I had gone with her, I wouldn't have made it to the ride. It wasn't until my mom said this that it finally dawned on me. The woman was not actually interested in riding the roller coaster at all. My dad gave me another speech about how I was never supposed to go anywhere alone with someone I didn't know well, and that in public I should always travel with someone else. He pointed out that even if I was with another kid, it was still dangerous. My parents did tell me that I had the sense enough not to go anywhere. My main thought about the back then is that the reason I didn't go was just because I didn't inconvenience my friend or teachers by getting on the ride so close to closing time without them knowing where I was. I didn't not go because I was suspicious of her. It's scary to think of how trusting I was of this woman, right up until I saw how murderous she looked when she saw that she had lost. Over the years, my mind went back and forth between assuming that she was some kind of predator and giving her the benefit of the doubt. Especially when I was younger, I really wanted to believe that maybe she truly did just want to go on the Raging Bull with me. But being an adult now, I can't give her the benefit of the doubt anymore. What wholesome explanation is there for a 30-plus-year-old adult asking some prepubescent child sitting by themselves to go anywhere with them, alone? Does anyone remember those giant indoor playgrounds from back in the day? You'd beg your parents to be taken to these magical places of vast pitballs, convoluted tunnels, and slides that hurt your ass all the way down. Together with friends, you'd pretend to be brave explorers embarking on quests through the maze of vibrantly colored plastic, or you'd play hide and seek as you excitedly hurried through jungle gyms balanced over tight ropes, zipped around on track lines, and barreled headfirst down tunnel slides. The place from my childhood was called Adventureland. Just writing its name sends a wave of nostalgia through me, followed closely by a chill. It was located in a shopping plaza 20 minutes from my house. From the outside it looked a bit run down, save for the colorful block letters that adorned its entrance. Once inside, a kid could get lost in its awing environment for hours, maybe even days if their parents let them. I'll never forget those tunnel slides. Those few seconds of darkness never failed to thrill me, where it didn't matter if your eyes were opened or closed. It all looked the same to every kid, a mutual blackness seen by all who dared to plunge into its abysmal mouth. I had a love-hate relationship with one particular slide. I remember standing at the top of it with bated breath. The slide would go down 4 stories, which was taller than my damn house, and dump its contents on ground level of the playscape. 4 stories of darkness, a red plastic tube with no lights, no windows, nothing to grip as you helplessly slid down it. Sometimes I would linger at the top, a certain fear rooting me in place. I would let kids go in front of me and listen to their whoops fade. Then I'd anxiously look at the other end of the slide, part of me wondering what would happen if the kids somehow got lost in the tunnel, never to be seen again. Before these thoughts could manifest into reality, I would catch the kid emerging unscathed, with a wide grin on his face. "It's safe," a voice inside my head said. A voice that would become more clear as I grew older. The voice of reason. See? Nothing to be afraid of. But sometimes that voice is wrong. Sometimes a kid's gut feeling isn't just his imagination getting the best of him. When every hair on your body feels like needles on a pine tree, you just know something doesn't feel right. Grown-ups won't believe you. Why would they? You're just a kid. Your input is irrelevant. That's why when the grown-ups, including my parents, never believed me when I told them that my sister had been kidnapped by the man who lived in the tunnels of Adventureland. After all, I was just a kid whose sister had gone missing. There were always those dumb rumors that spread throughout town during a time before text messaging and social media. Stories were swapped on concrete stoops like Pokemon cards, or outside convenience stores where $5 was enough to buy a day's worth of candy. They spoke of some sick fuck wedging razors in the cracks of the tunnel slides. An unsuspecting kid would go down the slide and come out with a gash the size of the Mississippi River down their back. I'd always wonder how someone could possibly put a razor blade in there, with the slides being so slippery and all. Other rumors included people hiding in the ball pits. If a lone child got too close, they would grab them, drag them up, and take them through some secret trap door at the bottom of the pit. "How many kids have they taken?" I would ask with fearful eyes. "Oh, hundreds," my friends would reply nonchalantly, and would go back to trading Pokemon cards. I always took these rumors with a grain of salt. Were they true? Probably not. Could they be true? Possibly. It was enough for me to play at Adventureland with caution. I would take extra time crawling through the tunnels, aware that someone could be hiding around the corner, waiting to grab me. Emily, my younger sister, was not as careful as I was. She was naive and vulnerable. I'm the one who introduced Emily to the wonders of Adventureland. I proudly showed her how to use the track lines and tipped her off on the arcade games that would give you the most tickets. I also led her through the tunnels and down the tunnel slides, including the one that was 4 stories tall. I couldn't show her any fear, so without hesitation, I plummeted down the slide. I heard her giggles until about halfway down. Then I heard nothing for a few seconds. Everything went dark. I was alone. I thought about the hidden razor blades. Before I could panic, I emerged into the safety of the light. I sighed in relief and looked up at the smiling face of my sister. I waved cheerfully. "See? There's nothing to be afraid of." I couldn't bear to scare her with rumors that weren't proven to be true. I couldn't tell her to watch out for razor blades in the slides, or kidnappers in the ball pit, or used needles in the tunnels. If you saw the way that she looked up at me, you would understand. It was like I was her hero. The night before her disappearance, I had a terrible dream. I was at Adventureland, standing before the giant playscape. The arcade behind me was silent. I was alone. There was a gripping pressure on my chest. That same inexplicable fear I felt in those few seconds inside the red tunnel slide resurfaced, only this time it was prolonged and torturous. My eyes wandered up through one of the tunnels. There, in one of the fishbowl windows, was a man. His ugly face was twisted in a sneer as he looked down at me with morbid pleasure. With a long, crooked finger, he beckoned me over, and my body began to move toward him, climbing up and up and up until I woke up. My bed was soaked with sweat. I would see the man's gleeful face every time I closed my eyes, only now it was more contorted. I shuddered and tried to find sleep again. I knew the bad news was coming seconds before the phone rang. My mother answered it, and I began screaming. Together, we drove to Adventureland to find my sister. The cops were already there. They kept a close watch on the people who came and went. I overheard several grown-ups talking about that day, and this is what I was able to piece together. Emily was at a birthday party for one of her classmates. When it was time to go into one of the side rooms for pizza and cake, my dad, one of the chaperones, did a quick head count. He noticed that my sister was missing. After waiting impatiently for some time, he started calling her name through the slides. She did not come out. Several of the kids went in to go find her, and when they turned up empty-handed, shit hit the fan. My dad began freaking out at one of the supervisors and demanded a search party for Emily. The police were called. They too couldn't find anything. Grown-ups began to tell stories about their dog. A kid was taken into the bathroom. Their head was shaved, and they were snuck out under this quick disguise. The same thing. I must have swept through that playscape a dozen times looking for Emily. I knew it was pointless. She had been taken by the man I saw in my dreams. The man who lived in the tunnels. I just knew it. But who would believe me? Adventureland closed its doors for good a few days later. When the cops asked for surveillance footage of the property, the owner shamefully admitted that no cameras were installed. When the building was inspected more closely, it turned out that Adventureland had several glaring safety violations. Emily's tomb of plastic had been sealed the next day. I knew that she was still in there, somewhere. Whether or not she was alive was a different question. My parents were too preoccupied with Emily's disappearance to notice that I had taken a long bike ride. My mission was to find my sister and bring her back. The outside of Adventureland looked more dilapidated than usual. I went around the back, looking for a way inside. There was a door with a small wooden window above the handle. I picked up a rock and broke the glass. The security alarm didn't go off, and I let myself in. I crept through the building until I came into the main room. The playground looked like the skeleton of some massive exotic beast. The only light source came from the front side windows, giving the room an eerie, amber glow. I approached one of the tunnels of the beast and stood there timidly. It was pitch black. I dug through my backpack and fished out the flashlight I brought with me. I snapped it on and cast the beam of light around the playscape. My flashlight bounced from one fishbowl window to the next, looking for that sneering face from my nightmare. When they all seemed clear, I shined my light into the tunnel. I then reached into my pocket, my hand gripping around the cold handle of my pocket knife. I started having second thoughts. What if the man was still here, waiting for me? Sure, I had my knife with me, but would it be enough to take on a full-grown man? Maybe, if I hit him in the jugular. I didn't know exactly where the jugular was, but my friend swore if he ever got hit there, you were as good as dead. What if I missed? It would take him 3 seconds to overpower me and unzip my guts. What if this guy wasn't even human? As if to answer my question, a chuckle came from deep within the darkness. My heart leaped into my throat. I waited for a minute, listening intently for footsteps, or in this case, someone shuffling through the tunnels. The place was as quiet as an empty cathedral. I thought of Emily, her radiating, innocent smile, the way she looked at me. I felt an invigorating urge of bravery wash over me. I climbed into that damn tunnel, flashlight in one hand, pocket knife in the other. I crawled through the tunnels cautiously. I had spent enough time there to know where I was going. But that didn't change the fact of how fucking terrifying the darkness was. With each turn, my bravery faded more and more. A new feeling was taking its place. I was going to die in there. After crawling through the maze of tunnels for some time, hearing nothing but my short, rapid breaths and thundering heart rate, I came to a strange sight. Someone had burned a hole in the plastic surface of the tunnel. But it didn't stop there. The hole kept going through the adjacent wall and into the building's cavity. It looked like something straight out of one of those Prison Break movies that played on TV. He took Emily into there, I thought with a dull sense of rage. I audaciously climbed through the hole and ventured beyond the wall. I passed the pink tufts of wall insulation that resembled cotton candy. The plumbing pipes hummed silently overhead as I crawled on all fours. The air here was heavy and had a wet basement smell to it. The tunnel finally opened up into a small concrete room. There was a dirty mattress in one corner, with scattered articles of clothing on top of it. Several yellow newspapers and envelopes were strewn all over the floor, along with a few cans of beer and baked beans. I picked up a random envelope. It was simply addressed to a person named Mr. Robert Gray. No address, no sender information. A sickening thought entered my head. Someone had been living here. Was his name Robert Gray? With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and withdrew the enclosed paper. There was a message written on it and what appeared to be blood. See, nothing to be afraid of. I got the hell out of my frantic escape, I thought I heard something chasing me. I turned my head once I was back inside the tunnels, and I could have sworn I saw a pair of orange eyes floating toward me, and they appeared to be gaining on me. There was no time to think. I scrambled through the twisting tubes of plastic. I didn't dare cast the light behind me. Whatever was chasing me, it was definitely not human. I had only one option if I was going to survive. That option was coming up fast. The 4-story tunnel slide. Without any hesitation, I dove headfirst down it and closed my eyes and waited to be cut to ribbons by dozens of razors. Before I knew it, I plopped down on solid ground. I sprang to my feet and booked it toward the exit. My pursuer wasn't behind me anymore, but I sure as hell wasn't taking any chances. I didn't slow down until I was on my bike and at least a half a mile away from Adventureland. I kept looking over my shoulder the rest of the way home for those glowing orange eyes. But I made it home safely. My parents didn't even notice that I was gone, and were unaware that they had almost lost another child that day. I kept my encounter at Adventureland to myself for all these years. No one would believe me at the time. I was just a stupid kid with an imagination that had been tainted by the abduction of my younger sister. But even as I grew older, I would just be seen as a damaged kid with a traumatizing past. My word meant nothing. I kept tabs on that old building Adventureland used to be in. It became a hibachi restaurant after that. They held a fundraiser there, and the chef put cyanide in one of the dishes, poisoning a dozen people. 8 of them died. It then became a house of worship. Some faulty wiring caused a fire to break out during one of the services. 14 people died. Today, it stands as a daycare center for children. No incidents have occurred yet.